greetings and welcome to Penny for a Tale. My name is Mitchell, and we have a super awesome show for the whole night, all night. But the kind of the best, the main course, so you will, at least for me, is Peter Nallo, who is the creative director over at Helmgast. Peter, thank you for coming onto the show.
No problem. Thank you for having me in this dark night, at least for me in Sweden. So,
It's getting darker over here too. We're gonna see
ah,
like a slow sundown here as the night progresses, which
ah,
should be pretty cool.
yeah, feels fitting for the for the theme of this talk.
I know, right? A very
Mhm.
dark theme too, as we discuss your latest work, which is Colt Divinity Lost. So for those not watching, or not watching, for those who are catching up, and maybe you're not watching, maybe you're checking out us out on podcasts or YouTube, or you're at work, etc., etc. Peter, in the best, most concise way, if someone was like, "What is cult?" What would you answer?
Yeah, I'm quite bad at answering those questions actually. I always find that people, like other people, can describe it much better than I can. But it's a modern horror game set in an urban setting with a Gnostic backdrop. So we have this occult game with parallel worlds, and it's kind of dark, and it deals a lot with playing characters that have flaws, and it's the much about the personal horror and that the horror comes from you to haunt you.
Actually, that's
That is
that's
my
yeah.
pitch for Cult.
I'll probably record that and just have that on like a quick record when everyone asks.
No, please, you can probably do it better.
So Colt, as far as I've seen, was first released sometime in the 1990s,
Yes.
and has since found a cult following. That's Colt with a K, because we're all about puns here. Uh, what led you to work on this new take on Colt?
Well, I first of all I was seduced by the first edition of Cult. It was the first it was the first role-playing game that really sort of changed the way how I wanted to play role-playing games, and it opened up so much for me when it came to horror and music and so many other things. So it was really that my love for the original game. That's the reason that Cult Divinity Lost was created, because it originally it was just a fan project. It was a fan hack of Apocalypse World. It was never meant to be a game of its own or anything like that.
Oh, and look at it now.
Yeah, now it's if you're just insane enough, so you start making it, and then you're like, oh damn, I can't stop now.
You have to finish.
Mm,
So
exactly.
you started off as kind of like this fan project and developed this amazing thing, which eventually led to a very successful Kickstarter. Kind of looking back from then now, uh, what are kind of your perceptions of Cult? Has it changed? Or what did you kind of add to give it like a certain unique Peter vibe to it?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to say that uh, it is me and Robin Liljenberg who sort of created the new edition of Cult. So he was sort of grabbing the rules part, and I handled the mythology. And we had also my friend Marco that was along for the ride when it came to the Kickstarter and everything. So it is a collaboration.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Uh, when it comes to the new edition of Cult, I would say it's a lot of the focus has shifted to more. I mean, old Cult was a lot of machine guns and armies, and it was a lot of weapons and fighting the demons with an Uzi and a hand grenade. And that is kind of cool, but I felt that I wanted to go to the more sort of spiritual level and how we are trapped inside the illusion, which is a core theme in Cult, like what traps us and that we are also trapping ourselves. So I think that that is sort of the shift from going from automatic weapons is the coolest to the more broader ideas, what is sort of keeping us down as mankind.
Yeah. And it's amazing too. I reread the Mythos the other day, and it's definitely some of the most beautiful writing in tabletop industry.
Oh, thank you.
So what like and for people watching, feel free to chime in with questions or just comment away. Pater's a really cool guy. Um, so why did you decide to use the Powered by the Apocalypse engine with this take? What was kind of that discussion like?
It wasn't a discussion really because this is all from Robin why we use this game system. We played Power Apocalypse World, and then he said like, you know what, guys? I have made like we should try to play Cult with this rule system, and we're like, yeah, sure. So we just he made us first hack on Cult, and we were like, this. It just felt so right. The rules
Yeah.
felt so right, and the stories that it created. And for a long time, when it was a fan hack, Robin made the rules, and I did the artwork because I felt like, oh, we need to have art. So I was sort of the artist because we didn't really want to write the mythos because it was just the rule system and the archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
And then somewhere we felt like this this is quite kind of good. Perhaps we should release it. So and
What
then I stopped making art and started to write instead.
is your art available anywhere that we can check out?
Yeah. Yes, I think I have some deviant art page with some examples of cult art that should be hidden away somewhere. It's different from the core rules. I think that some of it is kind of cool,
Hmm.
but I felt when we were doing it for real, I really wanted real artists making it, so to speak.
Yeah, and the what's that? I hope I'm saying his name right. The Harme, the
Mm?
Harm, the artist for Colt. I got to meet him at Gen Con.
Yeah.
Kind of accidentally, he came over to the booth I was working, and I was like, "You." Um, what was the kind of the first thing that attracted you to that style of art, or to that for the cover and all sorts of some of the artwork in Cult?
Yeah, well, for me, for me, cult is you want to combine the horrific and brutal and grotesque with the extremely beautiful
Hmm.
and something that gives a sort of sublime and religious feel. And I always think that he captured it in his images. They sort of felt like his artworks felt like I don't know, like classic works of art. They had some feeling of divinity. So I contacted him and said like, can you make a cover for our role playing game? And he said like, no, thank you for contacting me. I don't have the time. I said, okay, it's for Cult, by the way. And like, oh, and he was like, oh, I love Cult. Sure, I have played the French edition of Cult. Okay, I can do it.
Oh, that's
And
perfect.
so he's a fan of Cult. So that's why we sort of got him to do the art for us. But we have had a lot of internal art. I mean, artists for inside of the book. So we have quite a lot of artists just to try to find the right feel
Yeah.
of the game.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the archetypes definitely look cool, but have their kind of own gritty look to it, um,
Yeah.
as well as some of the other like mythos type creatures. While you were working on it, going back to kind of that apocalypse hack, and then moving on to the official, when did it start becoming more spiritual and less about like the guns and like the war and stuff like that?
It was really when I started to work on the mythology. First of all, I think that when we played the game, the stories that we played weren't about the violence and the war and that the demons had armies and I mean it was uh, nothing like that. So but when I started to write the mythos, I first read old cult, all the cult books, and then I sat down and just wrote sort of the mythos chapters
Hmm.
with them in mind, but from like my perspective.
Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of rewrite everything because I felt that the later editions of Cult just took parts from the older edition, which is superb, and then they added some sentences here and there and moved things around. But after a while, it felt like a patchwork. So when
Hmm.
I rewrote everything, I I also automatically I would say cleaned away the some things and elevated other things. But it was sort of a natural process. It was not like I had a
Yeah.
clear
That's
So,
interesting. Just the because definitely the spirituality of the game is one of my favorite aspects of it, and kind of diving into your past history. So hearing just that journey from something that I probably would have still thought of as a good game, but moving to what is now one of my best favorite games on my shelf.
oh,
Uh,
that's cool.
yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear. So I mean, approaching the mythos of Colt must have been an endeavor. I mean, it is about half the book of Colt, Divinity Lost. Um, what did you pull from as you were writing? What kind of inspired you?
A lot of things inspired me, and I first of all, I tried to write Cult as a gothic game because Cult to me is very gothic,
Mm-hmm.
not in the way that we have like castles and vampires, but the theme of the gothic with the labyrinths and the madness and the horrors that comes from a dark past, and there is no clear good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was a gothic game, so I wanted it to be very poetic in a way. And each chapter, I tried to find themes to work with. For example, when I wrote Metropolis, I really wanted to have like it should feel old and dead and heavy. So I tried to find words that felt heavy, and I
Yeah.
wanted to try to describe things with colors that were gray or blue or dark. And I listened to music that was like doomish, and I read about fallen civilizations. And when it came to the dream chapter, that would be surreal. I sought completely different inspiration. A lot of inspiration came from music and lyrics
Hmm.
that I sort of woven into the chapters. And sometimes there can be a lyric that I have sort of have as its core, and I have just built upon it. So that
Interesting.
was a. But I tried to do different things for different chapters to just get a different feel of them. So
Yeah,
yeah.
you should post up some of those music. I'd be very curious to see
Yeah,
what they are.
yeah, but I think that many times the music might not be that. Some of them is not that dark. It might
Mm-hmm.
be like I can just find things that I mean. For Elysium, I was very focused on this feeling of isolation and like file, feeling isolated from the world, and so I find some pop songs that sort of pull those themes up and built on that. So
Ooh, what was your I guess what was the pop song you listened to the most when you were writing that?
for Elysium, I mean it's a Swedish song, so you have never heard it. I might post it sometimes. There is probably a translation, but it's all about sort of the north of Sweden in the
Mm-hmm.
winter time when people are isolated and the feeling that the rest of the world is so far away, but we are isolated in our little Nordic country. And I just put that feeling inside how it should be to be
Yeah.
a person in cult. You are isolated and the world around you is dark and far away and strange. And yeah, something
It's
like that.
very different from our own pop songs here.
Yeah, but Sweden's we know melancholic. Even ABBA is melancholic when you listen to the lyrics. It's just like dismal lyrics. Yeah.
Definitely awesome. Um, so you said you were a fan of Cult, but what kind of aspects did you enjoy the most out of the Cult game and setting and mythos and everything like that?
You mean like old cult or
Both. Kind of like the journey through it.
for me, and I mean this is nothing new, but for me in old cult the whole idea that when you created your characters, you created your dark secrets,
Hmm.
your disadvantages, and then the sort of the stories tied into that, whereas in new cult they revolve around that. That for me I think was the core aspect, because then it was about your characters. It was about if I play a scientist that had performed medical experiments, I know that this is something that will come back to haunt me. So that is one part. Then I just love the Gnostic mythology, the city of Metropolis that is our ancestral home, the whole idea that we are divine, that we are trapped in our divinity, or like in our prison, and that we have
Yeah.
people that are sort of guarding us and trying to keep us in prison, and that there are the whole society is just a machinery to stop us from seeing the truth. There's a lot of things that you can dig so deep in that. And I guess I'm interested in Gnosticism as well,
Hmm.
more like the spiritual side of it. So yeah, no, I there, and that was from the start in Cult. So I think I also like the sort of the grotesque Clive Barker
Yeah.
things with flayed skin and crazy monsters.
Yeah, I love the imagery of Colt. All the different, yeah, the flayed skin, the kind of carnal pleasures that these strange entities indulge in. Um,
That was one of the biggest sort of decisions that I made. That was hardest for me because in old Cult they didn't really picture the creatures
oh,
unless it was on the cover,
mm,
um, and I can see the point of that. And I was like, should we really show the creatures? Because I agree with in many ways that if you don't see them, they can be more interesting and
yeah.
spooky. But then I watched a sort of Clive Barker talked about Hellraiser, and he said like, I want to see them. We should see the Cenobites, the demons. And I like, okay, we will show them. So yeah.
And yeah, they're amazing too. Like,
Mm,
strangely enough, I've been playing this past weekend. I was playing Pathfinder, and pretty much
mm.
every character inspiration came from one of the archons or death angels. Um, so really, you
Definitely.
can draw into any type of game.
Yeah, yeah. There is I agree. You can take a lot from the sort of ideas behind a lot of things in Cult.
Yeah, and especially just
Yeah.
from looking at the pictures, it tells
Mm.
it tells such a story with each one and how they look and why they look that way and kind of like the actions that they're participating in on the page. Um, Definitely,
Yeah.
it tells more of a story, I think.
Yeah.
So we have one question actually
Mhm.
from the chat. Um, or it's a question or a statement. We'll find out. So Determined Nerd says, I think one interesting thing is the mythos is super deep, but the players only see the shallowest end of it. They just see the weird and confusing stuff, and will probably never know the full truth. Have
Yeah, yeah.
have
It-
you played any games that kind of push through that level, and as you guys really start to explore the depths of the mythos of cult?
yeah, a little bit. I think that what's interesting with Cult, first of all, I think that the mythos should be deep because the mythos is also for the game master to
Hmm.
use and build upon. And the idea is not to use everything in a single campaign. You can use one of the dream princes for a whole campaign, for
Yeah.
example. And I like that it's deep because then you can see the connections to things because things are connected, and it also makes it feel real. The thing is that when you play on a more enlightened level, you play enlightened characters like hell, like John Constantine, or magicians that can open gates to other worlds and deal with demons, make pacts in a more advanced level. Then it moves away from being a horror game to a more urban dark fantasy setting.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's wrong. I think that you can play Cult on that level, but that is another kind of like grand intrigue game
Yeah.
where you are traveling and then you're probably so far from normal humanity that there are also other kinds of tales that are be told. But we have played some more enlightened characters and it works, but it becomes very different. And it's something that we probably will explore further on.
Oh,
but
interesting.
but right now we are in the more nitty gritty. I mean I'm clue. I really liked also the super gritty when you're playing like the normal people that just peel behind the illusion,
Yeah.
and then we fade away and like okay, that's cool.
Yeah, me too. It's one of my favorite aspects. Um, so we got another one from Zeal Zaddy. Peter, how would you introduce new players to something this dark slash deep if they are more used to standard fantasy? That's a good question.
I think that I have played a lot of Cult with people that have never played role-playing games before, uh, because I think that the rules for a player perspective at least are quite simple. If
Oh
you
yeah.
Because you as a game master, you say roll this, and you have like the all the moves on a sheet. If you play with sleeper characters, like you have 10 moves that you and a roll to read a person, and then you can just follow that. So it's very simple, and you can just move through the story. And since it's in our setting, everyone knows our world, so you
Mhm.
play it in our setting. And when it comes to the darkness, then it's just discuss with the players on sort of what level do you feel that they are comfortable with, and you can just hint the supernatural. And because I think that I have played Oakwood Heights with a lot of new people, and the thing that sort of like if someone is hammering their mother to death with a hammer and things like that, that might be a bit strong to some. But there are a lot of aspects that you can just with the creepy investigation, how Franklin Mills behaves, you can hint at. So I think that Cult works quite well as an introductory horror game for the players. For a game master, I can see it might be you might want to have game mastered a bit before. So just don't overdo it. But sometimes when you know that the players feel a bit comfortable, then you can push it a little bit extra and like do things that you perhaps wouldn't do in normal games, as long as it's on the level what they are comfortable with.
Yeah, definitely. I've introduced a couple new role players to Cult, and so far they've all loved it. Um, yeah, Zeal Zaddy says I have, and I prefer the slow creep rather than your face terror. Which I think that's one of my favorite things about Oakwood Heights is it just kind of begins as mundane, nice, normal, and then it like just starts to like bubble up. Um, that's definitely one of my favorite aspects of it.
Yeah, yeah. Oakwood Heights was actually an experiment. Just I want to try to do a super railroaded scenario
Hmm.
that didn't feel railroaded in the sense that it made sense in the story. So that
Yeah,
like, okay, you have a crime reconstruction, you're going to go to these places, and it's very seldom players diverge completely, but it's super railroaded. But normally people don't think about it because it's sort of logical, I guess.
yeah. It definitely follows like a good pattern, and always flows really nicely every time I've run it.
But I would say regarding the slow creep, I agree. I think that the key to Cult, and I would say any horror game, is really to hold back as much as possible. Like go for the creep, and then you can show a little bit, and then you not to sort of hold the reins and pull it back and stop, because when it sort of goes overboard or becomes too much, then also the creepiness sort of just fades away into something. Then it becomes dice rolls and things like
Yeah,
that.
definitely. I mean,
So yeah,
some of the best weird horror movies coming out, like Midsummer and was it The Void,
yeah, the void is great. It's so weird.
Hereditary? Yeah,
Mm.
they always start off pretty mundane and normal, and then they rev it up near that end, and then it just kind of leaves you with this feeling of wanting more and like what the heck just happened.
Yeah, but I also love the sort of when you have playing campaigns with the players, and you are sort of letting the players' dark secrets and their drawbacks start to play out, and the players start to realize, but my God, my character is this is a sick person, and they start to realize that my this is not okay, and they almost get a little bit disgusted or afraid of their own character. Then I also feel like then you are touching on something like very very cultish. Then you are sort of challenging yourself, and you are exploring parts that are dark, and yeah, man,
Yeah,
I mean the shadow aspect of your own personality.
yeah. I mean, in our playthrough in Black Madonna, the last two sessions, I think we've kind of progressed by increments, but the players have just been kind of exploring their own dark past and relationships with other people,
Mm.
which has been a heck of a time. So Zeal Zaddy says, yeah, when I run horror related games, I suggest to people that would be more like David Lynch than Friday the 13th, but that's my preference.
Yes, I also am a great fan of Lynch, um, especially. I mean, of course, I like Twin Peaks, but I mean, Blue Velvet. and it doesn't have a supernatural aspect, but it's just so many creepy characters, and that's really where the main character is corrupted almost in his relationship with Dorothy Wallens and Lost Highway. I mean, I really like Lynch as well, and I agree. I think that it's I, I like both, but I also go for the creep aspect. I want it to
Yeah.
be uh, slowly. The uncanny, I think, is a good word for it. I mean, that it's used a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something that Cult does very well. Is allows you to kind of grasp from these different media legends, these films and books and everything, and kind of play the type of game that you want, emphasizing different parts and such like that, depending on the enjoyment of the GM as well as the players. So yeah, thank you, Zeal Zaddy and Indeterminate Nerd, and feel free as always to continue poking around with questions.
Yeah, sure.
Um, but we'll move on to the next one that I have, which is it's really for GMs, which is what aspect of Cult do you think is the most important to focus on for a GM?
Hmm. I,
Yeah, that's a tough
I
one.
w- yeah, it's a tough one. I wouldn't say it's. I would say that there are two things. First of all, that and it's not just for cult really, but the holding back, not
Hmm.
letting it go overboard, uh, is clearly one thing. And for me, it's really important to spend time building the atmosphere of the scene, setting the atmosphere. Because when you have done that, for me, everything becomes much easier to play with. Sort of take the time to describe the location and how it feels, and uh, that is kind of common horror game thing, I
Hmm.
guess. But for cult, yes, don't try to cram too much in. Like hold back, pick the sort of aspects that you want to, and like lift the lid a little bit,
Yeah.
and and let them explore. And when it's about to go dark, try to sort of invite the players to go along for the ride, sort of that they are making decisions that they dare to make. They know that my character will probably just die if it goes into the wrong room. It's not like, but something bad might happen, but it might also be very interesting. And I would say that death in cult is seldom the worst fate of a character. It can often be
Yeah.
much worse. So I would go for that. But I think atmosphere. If you can get the atmosphere right, then you can sort of ride on that for a long time.
There you have it, atmosphere.
Yeah,
Which one of
yeah,
my
but
favorite things about Oakwood Heights is you could go to the Google Maps and check out the locations that you kind of picked out for the area.
yeah, I mean, I when I sort of Googled Detroit, I haven't never been to Detroit, so I feel a little bit bad about that, but it might change. I and I discovered Saga Island, and I was like looking up from it Google Maps, and there's like this is a part of Detroit that's completely black, and I zoomed in, and it's like this is some infernal industrial area that is just mysterious. And when you read about the history, it's like yeah, it's a Native American burial ground, and it was supposed to be a place for a mansion for this Sug that sort of bought the island. It is like a insane backstory. So I
Yeah,
like okay, I need to use that.
ripe with ideas.
Yeah, exactly. So you can just feast upon them.
So this is kind of going one of my favorite questions, something
Hmm.
that I like to talk to other people about. Which Death Angel or Archon do you find the most interesting?
Oh, I like them all, but I like when it comes to the Death Angels. We have I like Sathariel, which is sort of exclusion, the principle exclusion. That the ones that when you have a society that sort of allows people, when you allow people into your community, there are always those that are not fit in and they are pushed out.
Hmm.
And she is sort of the sad mother that sort of can get hold of their souls. And I because I think that it's disturbing the way that when creating the perfect society, there will always be those that don't fit into the perfect society,
Yeah.
and there is a power there that sort of lures them in. And I also like Gamichikot, which is fear. Like that the when you have no safety, it's fear of things that like, oh, they're coming to take our jobs, or oh, we
Yeah.
can't go out at night, and you can sort of build on fear. You can build power and trap fall people in the illusion by fear. So I kind of like that as well.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites as well. Just especially she's unique, and when you look at the kind of enemies and allies, it's just she doesn't have them. It's just too disorganized. So you kind of have
Yeah,
that uniqueness among her relationship to the other ones.
yeah, but I mean, I think that the that was something that I pushed a lot when it came to the new edition of Cult to sort of work with the principle, give each Archon and Death Angel a principle that is sort of this is the way they entrap people. This is
Hmm.
the way how they sort of fight for your soul. So you can, with that, you can kind of clearly see after a while, sort of, oh, here clearly this principle, the principle of Satariel, is at work, for
Yeah,
example.
definitely.
So
It
yeah,
subverts our
but I
existence.
think that I also really like when other people find ways and take their own take on Death Angels and sort of, perhaps it's like this, and like, oh, cool, yeah, it might be like that.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, so
Going back to you playing Cult and everything. What was the first scenario you played, or at least the first one you can like think about that was kind of stood out in your mind as yes, I love Cult.
for me, I bought Cult when I was 14, when it was released in Sweden, and the things we played back then didn't go that well because I mean we were I mean, we had played only like fantasy games before that, and so
Yeah.
it was like, oh, pick the weapons. Okay, I will have these weapons, and then it just escalated into sort of firefights and violence, and that became sort of it became an action game with some
Hmm.
supernatural weirdness. But I remember when I played Taroticum actually, which is a official scenario, and I played it with a good game master Andreas Nordlund, who is a dear friend of mine,
Hmm.
uh, and he actually helped with the book. He's a psychiatrist, so when
Oh
it
wow.
was about the chapter of madness, we sort of dived into that, and he helped me a lot of sort of things from that. But he played Game Master Taroticum, and there were scenes that really sort of stuck in my mind, and I realized like, oh, and I also think that I realized when I made a character that was not so combat oriented, but more
Hmm.
like I made a character with a backstory and a motivation that is not just violence. And I realized that, okay, now it becomes interesting. I'm playing a vulnerable character, and I'm sort of entrusting the game master to create an interesting story with this.
Oh, excellent.
So
That sounds like an amazing game.
yeah, it was really good. Just Taroticum in London in the 90s, the post Thatcher era. It was superb.
So, were there any times when you were writing the mythos? Because I assume it was in the very room that you're in, or do you have an office where you?
No, I have written the mythos in lots of places. I tend to leave my home when I write.
Mhm.
I either go to a library, a university library, an old library in Gothenburg where I lived back then, or I write when I'm riding trains. I like to when riding trains or in some dark bar or something because I've worked as a freelancer, so I tend to try not to write at home.
Mhm.
But when I'm home, I have free time. So I yeah, no, so I have a written cult all over the place. Uh, I forgot the question actually.
No, that was kind of the lead into
Okay.
what were kind of like. Were there any parts where, as you were writing, you felt like uneasy, or you kind of like scared yourself while you're writing, kind of like this dark mythos?
No, but I there were parts where I felt the sort of chill when like I have found the core. This is
Yeah.
this is it. I remember when I wrote the chapter about the underworld, which is like the subterranean regions. And I was in this university library, and just by a chance, I found a doctor's paper as a book then about mankind's fear of darkness, and like historically how the fear. And then I just started to read that, and like, of course, it should be all about the darkness and descent downwards. And when I just started to play around with words, it sort of unfolded, and I just got this feeling like, yes, I have unlocked the chapter. And the same thing is with the dream chapter, because I rewrote the dream chapter so many times because it was really bad in the
Hmm.
beginning. And it was also listening to a specific artist and reading the lyrics. I actually had to translate the lyrics via Google Translate from Russian
Oh.
to English. I don't know Russian, so but I just like the imagery of the albums that she had produced. I just like, okay, I got the now I understand how the dream world should be, and then I work from that. So I got the chill when you know that you are onto something good and you're
Yeah.
working with it.
Oh,
But
that sounds
I
awesome.
mean I am sort of, I guess I'm hardened, but I'm sort of like enthralled by the creatures of Cult and its dark world. I don't know if I want to live in that world, but in one way I it's fascinating to know that you might go through a dark alleyway and the illusion might be weak and you might enter into Metropolis or
Yeah.
meet something that is not human. So yeah, I am fascinated by the world. I don't fear it.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I mean, especially because I was watching several. I guess you were just talking about the different aspects of the mythos while you were writing, and watching you walk through these kind of old areas with the snow in the background. Uh, that's a
Yes,
lot of
yeah,
inspiration right there.
yeah. And I mean that is something I often did and often do. I really like to walk through cities at night.
Mm.
I mean that's if I in a new city, I want to go walk through that city at night. So I was in Berlin 2 weekends ago, and then I want to walk through Berlin at night because I can you can feel some sort of the atmosphere. And right where I lived in Gothenburg, we had this old park that is on top of a hill that you can look out over the whole city, and it's the
Oh
old
wow.
water tower, and there has been some strange murders there as well in the 90s. So it's sort of a creepy place, but it's also very inspiring to just walk there and sort of feel the atmosphere.
Oh, that sounds
So
perfect. It sounds like if you ever want to write for Cult, just visit some of these places.
take a walk at night. Uh, don't have music on. Just walk, look around, and let open your imagination. Like look, and will start to see new things. You go, oh, it's an old metallic door on that building. Where does that lead? And what is that sound I hear from the apartment, or that shadow behind the curtain
Yeah.
in the window? And then you just let your imagination run, and you can get those chills
Do you
because
have
it
a
can be.
favorite, like, of all the places you kind of walk through at night? Do any of them stand out as like, this is one of the best places? You know, the most imagination encouraging, just kind of sparks it.
Oh, I would say it's a bit unfair, but I would say Gothenburg because it's a city I lived in for a long time, and it's sort of an old town in
Mm-hmm.
the 1600s, but it's also an industrial town. So you have a lot of factories, and it's a big harbor town. And walking through night, there is always movement, but often in like these factory areas, and you can hear sounds and see people walking around, and it's just and you have old churches on hills, and it's sort of surreal. I mean it's very gothic. It's I
Yeah.
mean fitting for the name. So but I think that it's because I live there. So I I I walked there a lot, but I really loved Berlin as well. And I walked through Manhattan. I mean, parts of Manhattan that was not that crowded at night. And I also
Yeah.
felt like walking next to these gigantic buildings that are probably offices because they are quite dark in the nighttime. And there is some strange bar, and you just let your turn on your imagination and like, oh, I wonder where this stairwell leads. And
Yeah, when I was a little bit closer to DC, I'm a little bit north, but still
Mm.
close enough if I ever want to drive, just like a little bit. But I used to walk around the National Mall a lot, and just seeing like the old like statues and the trails and everything. And in the morning, all this whole place will be bustling with tourists
Yeah.
and people going back, but just kind of like the silence and the stillness of it is.
Yeah, but it's the atmosphere because I love to walk in forests at night as
Mhm.
well because I'm grew up in the countryside. But it's just the forest path that in the day is so familiar and nice. When you walk it at night, it's just one sound in the woods, and you're like, what was that? And you're like, your senses are sharpened. So
Yeah.
it is something with you are exposed in a way. So
Oh, that
yeah,
sounds terrific. All right. So we're coming
this
up to the end here. Sorry, were you about to say something?
no, this is talking about walking at night. This is a sort of and I mean it's just a weird subject in a way. It derailed.
Yeah, it's a good part though.
Mm.
It's definitely the things that kind of capture people's imaginations and inspires you. I mean, for GMs and for players, just trying to get a better mindset of cult. I think it's a great idea to just kind of walk in that stillness and in these like old places and just let like your imagination take you. And I think especially for a GM, you'll definitely find like campaign ideas. And I definitely encourage people to kind of like move through the mythos real quick right before you go on a walk. That way, it's just
Yeah.
kind of in your head. You definitely come up with some amazing things.
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
So I was looking at some of your older work and such, and you worked on was it Eon Second Edition?
Yeah, I worked on second, third, and fourth edition of
Ooh.
Eon and the other Swedish role playing games as well, which is very different from Cult. I mean, Eon at least is very different from Cult.
Yeah, I
So
was looking at that. I was like, huh, interesting. I mean, so what do you think are kind of like the biggest changes for you as a writer, a gamer, and a GM from when you first started off with like Ian Second Edition, and then moved to third, fourth, and then finally to Colt.
well, I mean, the thing that I mean they are very different. Eon is I mean, it's a very Game of Thrones game.
Hmm.
It is a game where like if you are bad with your dice rolls, you will get a knife in your eye and die. It's about intrigues in a fantasy setting that is very realistic. I mean, very close to our history. Um, so they are very different. But I worked on other games as well. A game called Noir, which is sort of a surreal
I
horror.
heard about that. I was desperately trying to find an English version of it.
Oh, we don't. We only have. It might be sometime, but it's only a Swedish version. It's an insane game. It's Kafka meets film noir meets horror and
Oh.
the purgatory. It's also inspired by Cult, but it is a weird project. But anyway, and a lot of Frank Miller. I read a lot of like Sin City and like
Ooh.
we should have this. A lot of violence. But Eon, what I think it compares them is that both Cult and Eon has a really complex mythology,
Hmm.
because Eon has like, I mean, it's insane when it's like, how is the world working? How is gods working? What are gods? How is magic? What is magic? And what is the history of this nation? All the writers for Eon spend an insane amount of time working with things that no one really notices,
Yeah.
because we are perverse, we Eonites. We are strange creatures and all are like strange academics, like engineers or historians and things like that. They just use their knowledge to build languages and insane things. So it's a niche game that
Hmm.
goes very deep, and I think, and with a sort of very complex rule system. What I think I brought from that is sort of taking the time, going through things several times, connecting things, and really question every decision. Like, is this true to the game? Is this reasonable within the fiction? So I think that sort of made a pretty strong ground to stand on when I worked at Cult. I wanted it things to make sense in its own weird
Yeah.
way.
Awesome stuff. I
Yeah,
mean, this it's I can't believe Noir isn't in English. I need to grab it one day. It sounds
yeah,
really
well,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, it's a thick book. My friend Marco, he was depressed, and I was unemployed, so we wrote it in like 1 year, and I was like, it's an insane project. It has some hardcore fans that really love it, but most people are like, what is this insanity? It,
Maybe
yeah,
one day. One day.
yeah,
Uh,
we will see.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see. I mean, there's definitely one of my favorite aspects of kind of like watching the tabletop community grow a little bit smaller as we get games from different countries, and they're changing at different languages and stuff like that. Is just learning about the writing styles and the way other countries approach games, and of course, there's always diversity within every region or anything like that. But I think one of my favorite aspects of like Swedish games is that the amount of attention on the lore is amazing between like Free League with Tales from the Loop and stuff
Mm,
like that. Helmgath with Colt, Noir, Riot Minds
mm,
with Lexicultum. It's just
mm,
rich with all this history,
mm.
and it's one of my favorite aspects of games. And as a GM, it just inspires so much, which has always been really cool.
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged blade. I mean, there is a lot of, for example, from the Powered by the Apocalypse audience, there is like, you shouldn't have that much mythos. You shouldn't, you should create the world. And we're like, no, here is the mythos. It's 200 pages. Learn it. Be true. Join the
Yeah.
cult. So, but I can understand it that it's much. But I mean, for me, it's the mythology is the core of cult. I mean, that is like that's what fascinates me, and I can feel that I can just dig deeper and deeper, and it will always like, this is super interesting. I will develop this further in some other project.
Yeah, exactly. It's just it reaches out to you, and it like makes you want to play more of it as you continue to read the different aspects of Cult. And you kind of smile as your players kind of get that slight peek, but aren't able to see the full like behind the curtain. But you smile because you know it, and you know the different machinations behind it. And it's
Yeah, yeah,
enjoyable as a
exactly.
GM to kind of have that perspective.
Yes, you are watching the web that the players are trapped in. Like,
Exactly.
yeah.
All right.
So,
I
yeah.
think that is it, Peter. Unless you have anything else you want to chat about or throw in.
No, no, not right now. I'm going to go to bed. It's late here, and I will, of course, catch up later with what happens with the continuation of Oakwood Heights.
Oh, excellent. We hope we can entertain. It's gonna be amazing. So for people, either you hopped in halfway through or just coming at the end here, we are going to be playing a unofficial Penny for a Tale sequel to Oakwood Heights, titled "The Legacy of Oakwood Heights." Which will follow our specific scenario that our run through of Oakwood Heights. But later in November, we will be releasing a free PDF for people to enjoy, where you can take either survivors from Oakwood Heights or a brand new set of characters, each with dark histories and secret stuff. So it's
That
gonna be a
sounds
lot of
amazing.
fun. Yeah, it's gonna
Sounds amazing.
it's
Yeah.
been super fun to work and play, and my players are super stoked when I sent them the character sheets, so it's awesome. So
That's
yeah, check us out at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, which is about 30 minutes from now. And Peter Nallo, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking with us and working with us, and yeah, and thank you for writing Oakwood Heights.
yeah, yeah. You're welcome. It's good that the experiment paid off. No, thank you, and it will be lovely to listen to. And hope you have a good evening and make really creepy scenes.
Oh yeah, all of
Yeah.
them.
All right.
All right, everyone. We'll see you guys later.
Yeah.
Bye.
Goodbye.